Hey everyone, hello, it's Isaiah. Hello, hey everyone. So this is Isaiah, and today I have with me Linnet. And this is the kind of special episode that I do for my podcast, and it's called Things Women Don't Talk About. And today we're discussing imposter syndrome. So let me introduce myself and what the hell I'm doing here for today. So this is a new series in my podcast called the podcast is called Zaya's Inspiring Evening, and I thought it would be a good idea to have a conversation with a guest for a change because I usually talk to myself on my podcast, and I'm interested in topics that are seldom discussed, whether they are difficult or they're not serious enough to be broadcasted. They're too mundane or too sacred or too hot, too dark, too light, taboo maybe, or too fun. And no subject is off the table. So what I do is I invite a speaker, a friend, a coach, somebody who knows something and who is interested in sharing about a topic, and they kind of choose the topic. I don't. And this happens. So this is the third of these. Hopefully there'll be many more. I do them once a month. Just if you don't remember who I am, I'm Isaiah. I'm an artist. I'm a magical, pragmatic inspiration mentor and tech coach. I'm a goddess teacher, a traveling priestess, and I work with the goddesses archetypes. And I facilitate retreats, workshops. I'm a tech coach for social online entrepreneurs. I help them untangle the tech and rock the online world while remaining true to themselves. So that's me. And my guest today is Linnet Jurutka. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Linnet is a mindset and leadership coach focused on supporting ambitious women in business to get to their next level. And this is one of those nice, well written sentences. But if you want to know more about Linnet, I'm going to let her introduce herself. Just before you go, Linnet, I want to specify if you're listening to this live, you will have the live icon somewhere, and you can also comment. We can see your comments, and we can write you back. If you are listening to this on replay or on the podcast, you can send us your comments. Voila. So, Lynette, tell us a little more about yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, thank you very much, Isaiah, for having me on your podcast. I'm thrilled to
Real
be here.
pleasure.
Yeah, so I'm a coach and mentor, and I work, as you just mentioned, mainly with ambitious women who feel overwhelmed or stuck in their professional lives. And that's both women in the corporate environment, but also women who have their own business. So I spent nearly 20 years working in the corporate environment in leadership roles and in HR. So in that time, I had some opportunities to support people in growing personally and professionally, and definitely as well for myself to grow. But I always felt, you're confined in that environment, and the corporation or the company is determining what your focus is going to be. And especially when you're in HR, there are those moments where you have a personal answer, but you're giving the professional answer. And I feel as a coach, I'm a lot freer in truly helping my clients, and especially women, because my experience at least has shown me that equality is still a concept and not a reality. And
Oh,
I
yes.
do feel that as women, we should be part of shaping our future and participate in that. And a strong part of that is making sure that we're having a place at the table, that we're powerful in society, that we have influence, that we have money, because you can support organizations and yourself that way, and be more independent and open in the way that you speak. So that's why this is really important to me and close to my heart.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much for what you do. Much needed work. So, when I said, "Would you like to come into this podcast?" You said, "Yeah," and we can talk about imposter syndrome. So today we're discussing imposter syndrome, what it is, how it affects women in particular and differently, maybe, of the way it affects men, and maybe at the end give us a few ideas on what to do about it. If we want to keep this close to our hearts and remain holding the syndrome, or maybe we can start releasing our grip onto it, or it can release its grip onto us. So mm, basically, my question is always the same. Why did you choose this subject? Why is imposter syndrome important to you?
Yeah, it's interesting because the moment you said to me stuff that women don't talk about, this came to my mind. And I think it may seem why, like, people are talking a lot more about imposter syndrome these days. But I find we often talk about it after the fact. Because the truth is, while we're experiencing imposter syndrome, truly, we're way too ashamed to talk about it. Because, like, by definition, when we experience imposter syndrome, we feel like a fraud and we're afraid of being found out, that we're currently doing something that we feel is overwhelming and we're way in over our head. And for some reason, we don't feel fully qualified to do what we're doing. And we're very busy trying to do everything right so that we're
Mhm,
not found
mhm,
out.
mhm.
And I think even some of the time we're not even aware ourselves that we're suffering from imposter syndrome, because it is really something that we kind of push down and close off and just really focus on, what do I have to do? Who do I need to be in order to fulfill the expectations that I believe everyone else has of me?
So it's one of those things that we experience without even knowing it sometimes, or it's on the unconscious level, and thus we don't speak about it. We don't talk about it, right?
Yes. And even if we're aware of it, we would be too ashamed
Mm-hmm.
to, at least sometimes you can talk to someone you really trust about it, but definitely when you experience it at work, you wouldn't be sharing with colleagues or, God forbid, your
Yeah,
boss, because like your main objective is to keep it from them.
yeah, that makes sense. And so for me, because I'm not that aware, and for maybe our listeners, can you sum up what is imposter syndrome, or how does it manifest, or um, what
Yeah.
exactly? And second question that you will answer in your own due time. Um, is it different for men and women, or do you feel that it's different? But
Yeah. So
first,
first of all,
go for imposter syndrome 101 for me.
yeah. Okay. So first of all, imposter syndrome is it's mislabeled. It's not actually, because the syndrome is a kind of illness, right?
Yeah,
It's a
a disease.
psychological,
Mhm.
yeah. So it's a concept, and it's more, initially I believe it was called an imposter phenomenon, and that's actually what it is. It's a phenomenon. But if we were talking and discussing imposter phenomenon, people may not put that together, because imposter syndrome is the word that's being used for it. So
Mhm.
let's stick with that word, knowing it's not an illness, it's not really a syndrome, it's a phenomenon. And it was discovered in the late 1970s. There were, I believe, two women doing a study on high achieving women, and they were the first to describe this phenomenon. That in particular, high achievers tend to have this, this feeling that they're doing a role, or that they're into something at work that they feel afraid of being found out, that they don't feel that they're competent in their work.
Mhm.
And in a way, it kind of goes in hand with being a high achiever, because we're very pushed in order to prove that we're worthy, or not just, we're not trying to prove something, in order to cover up our
Mhm.
fraudulent existence.
Mhm.
We're doing everything. And I keep saying we, because I have personal experience with this.
Mhm. Yeah, I
So
think
you
I think I me too. I think now that you explain it to me.
Yeah. And I can tell you, talking about it now, I can look back and I see totally what happened. But I Googled resilience and whatever. I had no idea I was suffering from imposter syndrome. I
Mhm.
just know I was very unhappy, and I felt under immense pressure to perform and meet everyone's expectations, which
Mm.
I felt deep down inside I couldn't possibly do.
Yeah. So
So
see,
I tried
you
my
kind of
best.
saying we overwork, we're overachievers to cover up this lack, or this
This
gap of
idea,
skill, or competence, or
yeah.
um, information, knowledge.
And one of the things that happens, that even if you're successful, you're putting that down to luck. You don't think it's because you were really good, you were lucky, or your team really stepped up, or someone else saved the day, where, you should congratulate yourself for being part of such a great team and asking for help. But, it becomes difficult to believe in your own competence and achievements, because deep down, it's basically it's a fear, and we feel ashamed
So it's a fear.
because I got myself in that situation, right? I took the job. Who like this? There's this phrase: "If you ever believe, who am I to do this?" That's like something to watch out for, because that could definitely be showing that
kind of
there's
the signals to see if you're suffering from the syndrome or phenomenon.
Yeah.
Is who am I to overworking, overachieving, trying to
Perfectionism.
perfectionism to be everything to everyone. Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And
And
so
often,
that
if you're self-employed, you can notice if you're doing lots and lots of courses because you feel like you're still not ready to show up and to serve your clients, you just need this another piece of paper on the wall. That could be imposter syndrome
more
too.
skills, more.
And definitely approval seeking. If you're
Oh,
feeling
yeah.
so insecure about what you're doing and you're constantly looking for positive feedback and you feel crushed if you get negative feedback, that could also be a sign of imposter syndrome. Because like there's nothing worse when you're already doubting yourself for someone else to add on top of that.
So yeah, there are many signs, let's say, or ways to spot it, or for yourself, also obviously for others, but sometimes it's so much more difficult for oneself to see oneself in the mirror. But thank you, because that it gives an idea of how we can do that. Since you mentioned it's not a disease or an illness, it's not a syndrome. Do you believe it's permanent? Like, we catch it and then we have it for life, or can we get rid of it?
No, but it can last for a long time if you don't actually do anything about it. And I think there are different situations. And I think that's one of the first things that can help us is to differentiate those situations when I am really feeling like I'm an imposter, and those situations where I don't. To remind ourselves that even if I feel that I'm overwhelmed with a job that I'm supposed to perform, there are always tasks that you're doing every day that you're really competent in. You're not going to feel like that 24/7.
Yeah, you're not an imposter at everything.
No, and sometimes there are situations, and I could give you an example of one, where it becomes really obvious, and you can see that through experience and practice, you get out of it. So I had this situation in my job very early on. I was working in project management, and part of that was to travel to client meetings, and to give presentations there to their. So this was in clinical research. There were client meetings with a lot of doctors, and we'd go there and just present on our part of the business. And the very first time I went, this took place in very nice cities across Europe, in 5-star hotels. And here is little old me in my mid to late 20s, for the first time ever walking into, I believe it was the Kempinski Hotel in Budapest, feeling like I really shouldn't be here. I felt like I should immediately apologize to the staff at the desk and tell them that I'm really sorry. And I hope that my company is really paying for the room, because I could never in 100 years afford to be here by myself. And I felt way out of my depth. And really the whole time I was there, I was afraid of doing something wrong, because I know I believe there were kind of secret rituals amongst the wealthy who know how to behave in a 5-star hotel, right? So I definitely noticed, and I came home, I was like, oh God, I felt so out of place when I was in this hotel. And I could really spot my imposter syndrome at that moment. But it passed the moment I left. Plus, it was just the first of many, many such meetings. And I believe at some point, and even now, I walk into a 5-star hotel and I feel right at home. I used to work there all the time. So now I have the opposite. Like I would be happy if someone stood outside a 5-star hotel to kind of go, do you want me to take you inside and show you the ropes? I could do that. but that was a very kind of isolated moment that I could definitely define and kind of go back. But if you think of moments like that in your working life, that's one way of getting out of it, is definitely to gain more experience. But I think, when it really affects your daily life and your work, it's best to get help from an outsider.
And can I just ask, why is it bad? Can we live with it and just ignore it, or what's the gain in getting rid of it? Basically, why is it a bad thing?
Well, obviously, it's not a very empowering feeling to have.
No, I'm asking the questions just to annoy you, right? I'm playing dummy here, but I think it's interesting.
No, but I think you're right. I think on top of everything else, the benefit of getting rid of it is obviously you're going to be feeling better. But it really, if you look at the symptoms, stuff like perfectionism, how much time and energy are you wasting on double checking stuff? There's this story about this woman, she was talking again after it happened and she'd gotten over it, where she was in a senior management position and she'd written a memo back in the days where you do that on paper, printed it out, put it onto everyone's desk, left the office. On the way home, realized that there was a typo in her memo, decided in the middle of the night to turn around, come back into the office, retype the memo, reprint it, redistribute, replace all of the copies just for a typo. Now, if she had been more confident and hadn't felt like an imposter and knew her, like that she had the authority.
That it's just a typo and it doesn't speak about her general skills or abilities.
Yeah, so she definitely would have gotten more sleep. She would have been less stressed. I'm sure her whole body would have thanked her. And that's another thing. Like, it can really, if this is stuff that keeps you up at night, it's robbing you of your sleep. Lack of sleep makes a bad judge. It actually makes you worse at your job, trying to be better at your job, right? So you're having the opposite effect. Yeah, and just, it makes you unstrategic because you're just looking and sweating the small stuff. You're not looking at the big picture. And while you're sitting in that spot feeling like, you're already in over your head, you're not looking for that next move that you can make. So you keep playing small. And you're letting other people overtake you, and you're kind of going, they should. And you start comparing yourself to everyone else as well, and kind of looking at how everyone else is better than you. That's not a great place to be in. So I think there's
I guess,
getting rid of it.
Yeah, I'm not so much a connoisseur, let's say that, of the corporate world, but I'm been in the psychotherapy world for quite a while now, and I know that you pronounce the word shame, which is always a good sign that something is not happy, basically, because shame is one of the lowest vibrations and emotions that you can feel, and obviously it goes against or it is the contrary of feeling happy, of feeling in peace, feeling that your life is going in a direction that makes you more abundant, more happy, more joyful. And I still believe, and I know that we agree on that the main goal is to be happy.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're self-employed and you're running your own business, I mean, it's the same story. You're not going to be playing in the big leagues and making big money if you're double and triple checking the spelling on your website or on the last email that you sent out.
And you never actually launch your products because you believe that they need more work and overachieving and correcting every typo 20 times, and
and the next time you're really ready, then you remember you just need that other certificate.
I know that I'm working on websites for clients these days, and it's impressive how much they never say, okay, let's put it online, and I have to push and say, okay, it's enough now. It is enough. This is good enough for now, but you have to put it online because otherwise you don't have an online presence, basically. being the person that is not. Obviously, if I do have imposter syndrome, I don't have it for their website, I have it for mine. So I can push for them, but I can see it in my clients, this fear of being discovered as not good enough or not skilled enough for it, um,
Yeah,
and that stops their progress, just exactly like you were saying, literally stops their
exactly.
progress, whether in the corporate world or as an self-employed person.
Yeah, and I think especially if you're self-employed, there may not be someone to push us, so it's really important, to have people like you to keep pushing and moving
Yeah,
things forward.
yeah. Or to have a
Um,
coach like you to help them
yeah,
uncover and clean up their act, basically our act, because I'm not going to pretend that I'm not there. And you mentioned several times when we were having conversations about this before we actually started the recording that you believe it's different for women. Can you tell me
yes,
why?
yeah. So in order to look at that, maybe we should look at how imposter syndrome kind of develops,
Oh yeah.
because I think there are
Where did
both internal and external reasons, and I think there's some additional reasons that make women more vulnerable to it. But I do believe that men have it too, and there are different studies, and some studies have found that even up to 70% of respondents to that study said that they had at one point or another experienced imposter syndrome. So, and that will definitely include men as well. So, like, there are internal factors. So internally, what's driving that imposter syndrome is our inner critic,
yeah.
right? And so already we know that women are raised to be more humble and less forward, and the whole kind of societal expectations that you'll be a mother one day. And we all know that for women, you're allowed to have a career as long as the family is taken care of,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So there's already a lot of factors internally that will likely have, that the inner critic that women hear probably has a bit of a different story from the inner critic that men hear.
Mhm.
So
Let alone that even in motherhood there is a bad mother syndrome, which is again, an imposter syndrome.
yeah. So like, I don't want to go into, like, I definitely know that men have
Oh no, I'm just
challenges of
wait.
their own,
I'm just
like
interested.
toxic masculinity and all of that. But I do believe, I do believe it's different between
Yeah,
men and
that,
women.
that's what I find interesting, that it's not the same. So
Yeah.
how could you define this difference?
Exactly. And the other thing is then external influences. So there is the way you've been raised, society's expectations, like, role models that you see around, your parents. And even I know that I was raised by, parents who believed in equality. And my mom always said, like, I was born in the 70s, and she had just been given the right to have her own bank account without my dad's signature. So she's like, we have equality now, and me thinking, well, as I was growing older, like, when is it really going to be here? So, like, I know that she believed there was more equality then than there had been before, but I think we're still not quite there. And we've been raised in this environment where we also have expectations of ourselves to be both a great mom and great at our jobs
Yeah.
in a different way that maybe men do. Although I do see differences as well. Um, but then, and I think this isn't just women, but minorities in general. And I read about this recently, and it just sounded so true. This was in the Harvard Business Review, where they said there is a lot in our working environments in terms of microaggressions that can
Mhm.
really feed basically that inner critic that I mentioned earlier. So we're already kind of questioning ourselves and kind of having that internal conversation. Can I do this? Am I good at this? But every time you get asked about, so where are your kids while you're here?
Mm.
Or are you sure that this is what you want to do? And
But
just
if you
little
take if you
things.
take this higher position, how can you handle this and your kids?
Yeah,
All these
yeah, and
questions.
and
Yeah.
and all these questions that cis white men don't get asked. So, or comments that they don't get, or looks that we may interpret. So they're like, when I'm talking about micro, like this is just constantly feeding our doubt. We may at any one point kind of push back and say, no, what are you talking about? Like, I've been working full time ever since my kid was born. It happened to me. My husband took parental leave and I went back to work full time. The amount of people in my surround, other women even, who said, why are you having a kid if you're not planning on spending time with it? Right? I go, no, this is our choice. But my inner critic was going, what's wrong with you? Right? So now I can.
There's a part of us that reacts, a part of us that reacts to the aggression with, no, but then it still hits somewhere.
Yeah.
It hits exactly where the imposter is living. Right.
Yeah, so that inner critic heard that, and it's unpacking that the next time I'm unsure about something. It goes, and by the way, you're a crap mom who just handed off her kid to his dad.
Not only are you not able to do this or that in your job, but you're on top of that left your kid at home with your
yeah.
I can see how there's seem to be a double weight, a double pressure for women. And so that's the basic difference, I think.
Yeah. And then like another factor that plays into it that I find in coaching, why people come to me, there's sometimes a bigger event. So it wasn't just a small comment by someone, but it was an outright, I got fired, or I got a really bad review, or, I lost my job, or I lost that position, or I felt overwhelmed and something happened. And it just proved to me that all of my fears were true.
Yeah.
And that's the point where a lot of the time people realize, so that's the crisis point where a lot of my clients find me and kind of go, but they don't think they need help with imposter syndrome. They kind of need help because they feel really bad after losing their job or getting that bad review. And then we find out while we're working together what's really going on.
Why was that? Sorry, why was that one review so important that it made them collapse? Because in fact, it was kind of the last drop that made the whole vase overflow.
Yes.
Good. So it's kind of a deep belief, if I hear you. It's something profound that the people who suffer from imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon are experiencing. It's deeper than just this I'm not good at my job situation. And it has, if I hear you, for women, ramifications in most aspects of their lives, not just the professional aspect, but also motherhood, maybe relationships, or maybe being a good daughter or a good mother or a good husband, wife. Sorry. So it kind of it touches every part of someone, but in tiny, hurtful ways. It's not, until this last drop that makes the vase collapse or the thing. And so, what do you believe is the main reason that this takes over my personality, kind of, do you think it's sheer masochism, or is it something to do with keeping me safe?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's, that inner critic is basically telling us that story that it's just there to keep us safe. And of course, playing small feels safer than going out, becoming visible and playing big. And that's something natural that happens as well, be it in the corporate world or when you're in business. The more successful you become, the more visible you become, the more people comment on what you do, the more haters you're going to get, the more fragile you might feel. And, what I was saying, so those microaggressions can kind of become louder and become more macroaggressions, if you want to call it that. So, so I think it's in a way, that inner critic that's telling us, that's commenting on what's going on, is telling us to keep playing small and to not go and do something that, we're not prepared for.
Yeah.
It's about
if I if I don't believe that I can become big, I stay small, basically.
Yes.
And so
And
I'm not putting my face at risk of people not liking me, basically,
yeah,
or people having something to say to me that my inner critic would then repeat and enhance and sing a song about, basically, and make a party in my head about that. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah. And
And
that's
how,
actually a big part of working on it, is to work with that inner critic and to question all of those stories that the inner critic has told us and that become our truth, right?
yeah, because that's what I was going to say. Because most people, at least if I speak for myself instead of speaking for most people, for me, I know that there have been times when I have felt like a fraud or an imposter, although my results were absolutely good. So there was no evidence that my experience was that of an imposter or that was one of a failure. But that I wouldn't believe. I would still go in my head with this critic telling me that I was not good enough and that I needed to perfect myself or work more or get another certificate or whatever.
Yeah,
So it's kind of, I did not trust my own eyes, basically, or my own experience.
yeah.
Um,
And it's what we were talking about in the beginning. It's when you're kind of going, I was just lucky.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Mhm.
And you could add to that, yeah, but other people do more or achieve
Yeah.
more.
Mm,
You know, someone else is bigger than that.
yeah.
So
Or if somebody helped me, it's not all me.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's kind of a fight, an an interior fight between reality, the proof that I can see there, and my critic who still insists that reality is untrue. So it's kind of the thing that slowly drives you crazy, isn't it?
it can. I mean, it's literally like your inner critic turning against you, and
Hmm.
you believe they're still your friend.
Yeah,
They're like a bad friend who keep telling you that you're not good enough, that you're not a good person, that right? And there comes the point. So, well, you can cut off your inner critic, like you can leave a bad friend,
mm,
but with the inner critic, it starts. I think, and this is some of the work that I do with my clients, with really questioning those stories that we tell ourselves, and that can be hard to do for ourselves because we're already believing those stories.
yeah,
We
that's what I was going to say. We're having this. I feel like I'm having this conversation in my head, and there's two of us, and we're already convinced.
yeah,
So I can absolutely understand how a third exterior real person, like a coach or a mentor or somebody like you, basically, could come very, very handy because they would be in a position to see the lie that I'm entertaining, that the both parts of me are entertaining together. Like they're having this nice little merry-go-round of lies, basically. And until somebody else comes from the outside and says, hey, no, this is not true, or have a look at this, or how come you
yeah,
believe that? I guess it's really crucial. It's one of those things that we can't do on our own, basically, because we're already a believer of the lie, of the inner critic.
yeah. And I think it's important as well, though, to make a difference between those people that we're seeking approval from, right? So at work, for example, I may be looking for approval from my boss.
Hmm.
And I keep thinking, as long as my boss is happy, I'm doing well enough. But, it's basically just like giving a thirsty person like a shot of water. They're still going to be thirsty
Yeah.
afterwards.
Hmm. No,
So
I hear you.
you think it's going to go away when other people praise you, but then you don't really believe the praise.
Yeah,
So
which
it's
means
going to go away.
that it's kind of a vicious circle, right? You work more to get the approval. You get the approval, you feel that you need to work more to get more approval, and it's a never-ending story until.
Yeah,
So the if I hear you right, the idea is really to change the conversation with the inner critic, and
exactly.
that is one of those things that is so much easier with somebody else, with an exterior person interfering in this, yeah, breaking the cycle. So
Yeah.
that's what you do, right?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And that's why I'm saying it's not just about saying, no, you're doing really well. Because like other people can do that. Your clients can tell you that your service is amazing. Your boss can tell you that they're really happy with your work. But actually, the higher your performance level, people get used to you performing at that level. So if you keep performing at that high level, kind of the praise for it kind of ebbs. So you feel pushed to do even more to get back at least that level of approval that you used to get before. So
Which is the
that's
exact opposite of what we're looking for,
yeah.
basically.
So that's why I'm saying it's really helpful to bring someone in from the outside. You can talk to a close friend. I think one of the things that I found really inspiring was there were a
You
lot of
broke off for a minute there.
Hmm?
I hope, for me, you broke off for a minute there. So I hope it was good. Could you repeat your last sentence just in case?
Okay, so I was just saying that it's important to kind of look beyond kind of your realm of people that you're normally with. It can be good to talk to a close friend, but it's likely that a close friend will just say, no, but you're great. I can see your great work. And then you're getting that approval again, but it may not be enough to kind of break that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
What can be useful is to, first of all, find out that you're not alone, because, shame is something that thrives when you're not your own.
Very much shared emotion,
Yeah.
shame.
So once you start realizing that other people are ashamed about the same thing or have similar experiences, that shame can become quieter. So even there's some really great TED Talks by some people that, like, you wouldn't believe, amazingly successful, that you would never think they would have imposter syndrome. And even Oprah Winfrey has described it. I don't know if you watched, there's this documentary on Netflix with J-Lo. It's called Halftime. She describes that there was a time where she had a #1 hit record. She had a blockbuster movie out. And she's a brilliant dancer as well. And she was touring. And all the tabloids would write about were her failed relationships. And she thought about quitting because obviously she was no good.
Yeah.
And you sit there and you're going, what are you talking about? So thankfully, I think she's gotten past that.
But it's
But
really interesting because that shows really that there is no higher limit,
No.
If it's never enough, it's never enough. And for your inner critic, and you need to go more and more and more. And however, the more, I mean, we're talking J-Lo or Oprah Winfrey, it's never enough. So the solution is not to get approval in order to, make sure that you're good enough. It's to just decide that you're good enough at some point, with some help, with that somebody can just ask the good questions and not just reassure you, because I think it's shame is not a question of being reassured to get it. It has to.
It's about changing your perspective, and that's what we do in coaching. And I think as well, especially if you're in a leadership position or you're self-employed, it's always a good idea to get a mentor, like someone who's been where you're at right now. And I know some companies kind of offer internal mentorships, which is great. But I think what's important is to get someone who doesn't have their own agenda. So if it's someone inside you, so I once had a great mentor, but she was also my boss. So she helped me a lot, but there were moments where she had an interest in my performing.
Yeah.
So it's better to get an external coach who has their focus on you and only you, and doesn't care about what happens with the company. And if you're self-employed, obviously, if you're talking to someone who's also invested in your business in some way, they may help you up until the point where they need to make a decision. If I give you advice in this direction, that's good for you, but advice in this direction is good for me.
Yeah.
So that's why I
so
think
having somebody who's really on your corner or in your corner, and not in your inner critics, and not on their own agenda, basically. So that's what we call a coach, right? Or a mentor. So it's about deciding one day that we are not okay for playing small anymore, and getting the help necessary to get out of this loop of self-criticism and shame, and embrace the fact that we are enough per se, but it's easier done than said than done, and that's why it's so much interesting that
Yeah.
there are now specialists like you who can really help us get out of our own heads, basically.
Yeah. And it's really rewarding work. It's amazing when you see the change in people. And it's really interesting as well because it can be such a pervasive pain that you feel like it rules your life. And I've
Hmm.
seen people change very quickly that, once the pain is gone, and it's almost like, when you have a back pain, that
Hmm.
rules your day. Like every move you make, you feel like you have this back pain and everything
Hmm.
becomes about that pain. And once it's gone, you forget about it quite quickly. And you're like, yeah, I'm like, I
let
still
me let
looking
me
good on
hike,
the
let me
marathon.
do this thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I mean, I work with ambitious women, so they have goals. So I had a client and I was working with her on an issue. She had the situation where her boss had really given her a poor review and criticized her heavily, and it just ruled her day. And we did some work, and then at one point we're working on something, and I said to her, like that example you used last week with this guy, and she's like, you know what? I really don't want to talk about him anymore. But the way I was telling you about this program that they're running to hang on, my son. He's not die Tür zu. That's life as a mom.
Keeping it real.
Yeah, it's real. Well, I can't cut it out. Yeah, there's that point where she said, I don't really want to talk about that anymore, but I'm looking to further my career, and can you help me with getting into this program? And she hadn't even told me about the program when we started working together. And then
Awesome.
afterwards, when I asked her about it, she was like, yeah, I'd stopped believing that I should be joining that program because I
Mm-hmm.
thought I'd reached my limit.
Mm-hmm.
And she always got praised in her career up until she got to that point. And then she said, I thought this was as high as I was ever going to go.
Yeah.
So she felt she'd hit her limit. And at that moment when she said, I kind of don't want to talk about that guy anymore, I was like, this is major. And she's like, oh, really? Oh, that's strange. That's gone.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, really?
So all of a sudden, her focus was all in a new direction. And we just had to take a moment to kind of go, do you realize what just happened?
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah,
So,
I'm not running.
people who are listening to us, if you feel that you're stuck, that you are suffering from this syndrome or phenomenon, that you feel like a fraud or an imposter, that you feel like you have to work and work and work or get another certificate or are never good enough for anything and have the perfectionism things, just reach out to this amazing lady on my left or right, because I never know how we chose. But reach out to Linnet. You can do so by finding all her info is in the description of this video, whether above or below. It depends on which platform you're looking. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, well, it's going to be in the podcast notes as well. So reach out to her. You can find her on LinkedIn, and or you can just email her. She works one-to-one, and she is amazing. So thank you very much. Do you have final notes or final things that you want to tell to our listeners? Or
No, I think you just said it all. I just want to thank you very much for
real
making the
pleasure.
space to have this conversation, and for having me on your podcast.
This is awesome. I'm really happy because it's kind of one of my big things, the stop playing small. I think in every, I define myself as a too much woman. So, kind of, and I know that for me, becoming the too much woman has been a journey exactly from feeling not enough, the not enough girl into the too much woman. And I guess when my journey will evolve, I won't need to be too much anymore. It's like, but I think that I've believed for so long that I was not enough that I had to be too much then.
Yeah.
So for a while, I'll be there.
Yeah. I think that's the one thing maybe that we could add is that it's not like you do this work once and then it's gone forever. It can come up again, but once you know that you've beaten it before, and
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it's like you can see the dragon coming, Or you can hear the critic again. And I have this friend who says that she now in her head has most of the time a cheerleader instead of a critic, but sometimes the critic points its head again, and then she knows to shut it down basically. So
And it's perfectly normal. I mean, like it's
yeah,
not going to be gone forever and never ever a moment of self doubt again. That's not realistic.
no,
But
and it's
at a manageable
dangerous almost. It would be dangerous almost. Never doubt yourself at all. Like, oh my God. So yeah, thank you very much for being here. Dear people who are listening, definitely reach out to Lynette if you're feeling that this is one of your issues. Whether and I'm really I think it's really important to restate that you are both working with people in the corporate world and people who are self-employed or having their own business, because there are very few people who mixed those two experiences that you have, because you have your own business now, and apply it to this imposter syndrome situation. So enjoy this amazing woman who is perfectly enough. Thank you very, very much for coming. And thank you to our listeners for listening to this conversation. The next one is going to be in a month or so. And I have no clue yet who with and what we'll be talking about, but we'll be there. Thank you very much. Bye for now.